Evolution has given us some real gems over the last few billion years. Dinosaurs get all the spotlight, sure. Giant teeth, horns, feathers, tails, we get it. But let's be honest, most of them are just big lizards with upgrades. If you really want to get weird, you have to look elsewhere. We're talking about the deep cuts. The evolutionary experiments that look like someone lost a bet with biology. Some of these creatures lived so long ago they make dinosaurs look like toddlers. Others are just so bizarre they broke paleontologists' brains for decades. Transparent heads, spiral saw teeth, vacuum cleaner mouths, animals built like Roombas and shrimp with 5 eyes. So today we're diving into the prehistoric Twilight Zone. These aren't just extinct, they're deeply extinct. And also kind of upsetting. Welcome to the strangest extinct creatures ever found. Proceed with caution. Evolutionary design was absolutely unhinged. If you've ever looked at a child's craft project and thought, that should never exist in nature, meet hallucigenia. This thing looks like it crawled straight out of a fever dream and landed in the middle of the Cambrian explosion. Which, frankly, checks out. The Cambrian was like nature's R&D department with zero quality control, and hallucigenia was one of its more questionable prototypes. Discovered in Canada's Burgess Shale and dated to about 508 million years ago, Hallucigenia sparsa was a soft-bodied marine animal, roughly the length of a pinky finger. So not terrifying in size, but absolutely terrifying in concept. It had 7 pairs of spiny dorsal spikes sticking up like a row of impaled toothpicks, and underneath a series of soft, noodle-like legs tipped with claws. Its head was tiny, featureless, and for a long time completely misidentified. Which brings us to one of the best parts of this little disaster. Scientists literally studied hallucigenia upside down for decades. When paleontologist Simon Conway Morris reconstructed it in the 1970s, he thought the spines were legs and the actual legs were tentacles. The head? Yeah, he thought that was the tail. This thing was so strange that professional experts looked at it and said, yeah, this all tracks. Eventually, thanks to better fossils and modern imaging, paleontologists figured out the correct orientation. But not before this spiny worm had cemented its legacy as the patron saint of evolutionary oopsies. Even then, the more they learned, the weirder it got. That mouth, ringed with teeth. That throat, also ringed with teeth. Why? Unknown. Maybe for anchoring food, maybe just to haunt us. Despite looking like the biological equivalent of a punk rock sea cucumber, hallucigenia is surprisingly important. It's part of a group called lobopodians, early relatives of modern arthropods, which includes insects, spiders, and crustaceans. In other words, hallucigenia might be the deeply cursed granduncle of your pet tarantula. Its bizarre body plan tells us a lot about how complex life diversified during the Cambrian period, when multicellular organisms were trying every possible shape to see what worked. Most of those experiments failed. Hallucigenia didn't make the final cut, but it left us a fossilized reminder of how wild evolution used to get. So yeah, hallucigenia was small, spineless, technically, and mostly harmless. But if you saw it crawling toward you today, you'd probably move to another planet. Some animals look weird because evolution took a few creative liberties. Others look weird because a paleontologist somewhere was desperately trying to reassemble crushed fossils and said, yeah, this seems right. Atopodentatus falls squarely into both categories. This reptilian oddball swam through the shallow seas of the Middle Triassic about 245 million years ago, and left behind a skull so mangled and confusing that early reconstructions turned it into a sort of marine nightmare. The first fossil they found in China showed a long, hammer-shaped jaw that looked like a cross between a flamingo's beak and a vacuum hose. Scientists assumed it had a narrow, downturned snout, maybe for probing into cracks like a prehistoric duck. But then more fossils were found, better fossils, and they revealed something way, way stranger. Turns out, Atopodontatus unicus, and yes, that name literally means unique strange tooth, didn't have a simple duck bill. It had a zipper mouth. Imagine a wide vertical split down the middle of its face, with rows of interlocking, forward-facing teeth, like someone tried to seal its skull shut with dental floss. This thing looked like it could unzip its own head. And if that visual isn't weird enough, it used those teeth to scrape algae off rocks underwater. Basically, it was a marine reptile that decided to be a herbivorous vacuum cleaner. It would press that flat, horrifying mouth against the seafloor, rake in plant matter with its peg-like teeth, and then slurp it all up like a prehistoric Roomba with taste buds. And here's the kicker. This wasn't just some isolated freak. Atopodontatus is part of a bigger story. A brief window in evolutionary time when marine reptiles were trying out plant-based diets. Most reptiles in the Triassic were either carnivores or died trying. Going herbivore in the ocean? That was a bold avant-garde move. But Atopodontatus wasn't interested in eating fish or ammonites. It just wanted to hoover up algae all day with the most unsettling face evolution ever approved. Anatomically, it was around 3 meters long, about the size of a small car, and likely swam with a long, sinuous body and paddle-like limbs. But the real show was always that absurd skull. Its dental arrangement was so unique, it took multiple fossil finds just to convince scientists they weren't being pranked by the Triassic. So next time someone tells you dinosaurs were the weirdest reptiles, just show them Atopodontatus. Because nothing says, "What even is this?" quite like a herbivorous sea lizard with a mouth that opens like a coin purse. You know how some ancient creatures look like something you might actually see today? Helicoprion is not one of those. This thing was a shark with a buzzsaw inside its face, and for over a century, scientists had absolutely no idea where that buzzsaw even went. Let's rewind to the Permian period, about 270 million years ago. Earth is a hostile mix of volcanic eruptions, weird climates, and oceans full of things that really shouldn't exist. Enter Helicoprion, a predatory cartilaginous fish that swam around looking for things to slice open with its spiraling jaw of doom. The fossil that caused all the confusion was a perfect spiral of tightly packed teeth. A whorl, like a circular saw blade. But here's the problem. The rest of Helicoprion didn't fossilize well. Cartilage doesn't preserve like bone, so paleontologists were left with this isolated tooth spiral and vibes. They didn't know where on the animal it belonged, so for decades reconstructions went totally off the rails. Some scientists thought the buzzsaw stuck out of the snout like a narwhal tusk from hell. Others put it on the dorsal fin, the tail, or even imagined it just spinning around randomly on the outside like a prehistoric Beyblade. It was chaos. Glorious, fossil-based chaos. Finally, in the 2010s, modern CT scans of new fossils from Idaho helped solve the mystery. The spiral was in the lower jaw. As Helicoprion grew, it never shed old teeth. It just kept adding new ones to the front of the spiral, while the older ones got pushed inward, forming a tightly coiled, deadly pasta machine. So how did this work in action? Picture a jaw that slices upward and backward in one motion. When Helicoprion bit down, the buzzsaw pulled prey inward while sawing through soft flesh. Perfect for squid and other soft-bodied marine animals. Hard shells? Not its thing. But if you were a squid in the Permian, this was your sleep paralysis demon. It was probably around 4 to 6 meters long, about the size of a great white, with a long torpedo-shaped body built for speed. But that mouth? That's what made it legendary. No other animal, before or since, has evolved a spiraled whorl of teeth in its jaw. It was the only one that thought, you know what this bite needs? A built-in circular saw. And the best part? We still don't have a complete skeleton. Most of what we know comes from jaws and a few skull fragments. But even with that limited info, Helicoprion has achieved full cryptid status. It's on t-shirts, tattoos, video games. The ultimate prehistoric horror show with the face of a malfunctioning kitchen appliance. Imagine finding two arms. Just the arms. They're massive, longer than a grown adult, with three-fingered claws that look like they were made for tearing through armored tanks. But no body, no head, nothing else. That's how Dinocaris first entered the paleontological spotlight, as a mystery with murder arms. Discovered in Mongolia in 1965, the original fossil was just a pair of forelimbs and some shoulder bones. But what limbs? They were nearly 8 feet long with claws that would make a bear jealous. Scientists had no idea what kind of creature they belonged to, but they assumed it was a carnivorous nightmare. You know, something worthy of those claws. Maybe a megaraptor. Maybe some undiscovered Godzilla-tier predator. Fast forward almost 50 years. In 2014, more fossils were finally uncovered, and the full picture of Dinocaris mirificus was not what anyone expected. Turns out the terrifying murder limbs belong to a hunchbacked, pot-bellied, duck-faced, omnivorous weirdo. Picture a mutant goose crossed with an ostrich, fused with a humpback camel, and sprinkled with nightmare fuel. Dinocaris was about 11 meters long, roughly the size of a school bus, and weighed around 6 tons. Its head was long and flat like a duck's bill, with no teeth. Its back arched upward into a sail-like hump, possibly for display or fat storage, and its stomach packed with gastroliths. Stones used to grind up plants, like what you'd find in a modern bird's gizzard. In other words, it probably wasn't hunting anything. It was browsing, grazing, just vibing. And yet it had arms that looked like they belonged on a serial killer. It's like giving a sloth the hands of a velociraptor and saying, yeah, this makes sense. The most ridiculous part? Dinocaris was part of the ornithomimids, the so-called ostrich dinosaurs. Most of them were sleek, fast, and looked like prehistoric roadrunners. But Dinocaris said, nah, I'm going full goblin mode. It had a bulky body, a bizarre sail, heavy bones, and possibly even feathers. Its head likely ended in a keratinous beak, no teeth but perfect for cropping plants. It may have eaten small animals occasionally, like fish or bugs, but this was no apex predator. This was a lumbering, herbivorous swamp goose that just looked like it should be terrifying. And for decades, it fooled everyone. Why those massive claws? Possibly for pulling down branches. Maybe for defense. Maybe just because evolution had no chill. Whatever the case, Dinocaris is a masterclass in prehistoric misdirection. Everyone thought it was a monster. It was actually a waddling vegetarian with style. If you've ever wondered what would happen if you gave a pool noodle eyes and a grabby claw mouth, well, Illinois already has you covered. Meet Tullimonstrum gregarium, better known as the Tully monster. It's not just a fossil, it's the official state fossil of Illinois, which is bold considering no one actually knows what this thing was. Discovered in the Mason Creek fossil beds, a treasure trove of Carboniferous-era life dating back about 307 million years, the Tully monster is one of the most perplexing creatures paleontology has ever coughed up. It was soft-bodied, about a foot long, and looked like someone slapped together leftover parts from 5 different animals and called it a day. Let's break this mess down. The Tully monster had a long, segmented body that sort of tapered into a paddle-shaped tail, possibly for swimming, but probably just to make it weirder. Its eyes were on stalks. Stalks! Like something out of a cartoon alien. And then there's the head, or lack thereof. Instead of a normal face, it had a long, flexible proboscis, like an elephant trunk that ended in a claw with teeth. So imagine swimming through a murky carboniferous swamp and seeing a fleshy torpedo with eye stalks and a grabber arm for a face coming at you. That's Tully. No bones, no spine, just vibes. Absolute swamp cryptid energy. The real fun, though, is in the classification nightmare. Scientists have spent decades trying to figure out what box this thing belongs in. Is it a vertebrate? An invertebrate? Some unholy transitional phase in between? At various points, people have tried to shoehorn it into categories like mollusks, arthropods, annelids, and even lampreys. In 2016, a study claimed the Tully monster was a vertebrate, specifically a jawless fish, citing what looked like a rudimentary notochord and gill structures. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Other studies pushed back almost immediately, arguing that the evidence was shaky and the structures were misinterpreted. Even today, the debate rages on, because Tully just refuses to be categorized. It's the paleontological equivalent of none of the above. And honestly, that kind of fits. The Tully monster isn't just weird, it's aggressively weird. It's like it knew it would one day be a fossil and decided to mess with us on purpose. Every part of its anatomy seems designed to confuse. Eyes too far apart, a mouth in the wrong place, no clear front or back. It's like evolution threw a tantrum halfway through designing a fish and just hit print. Despite its mystery, Tullimonstrum is a local legend in Illinois. The Mason Creek fossils preserve soft-bodied organisms in ironstone nodules, a rare and incredible form of fossilization. Thanks to that, we have hundreds of Tully specimens to stare at in disbelief, and Illinois loved it so much they made it their official fossil in 1989. That's like making Bigfoot your national bird. So while the Tully monster might never reveal all its secrets, it's done something even better. It's given us a fossil we can point to and say, I have absolutely no idea what this is, and I love it. Most elephants evolved to be majestic, tusked icons of the savanna. Platybelodon, on the other hand, said, "What if I just became a walking gardening tool?" This Miocene-era oddity roamed around about 15 million years ago and had one of the most absurd skull designs in mammalian history. Imagine an elephant whose lower jaw flattens out into a giant scooped spade and then evolves teeth along the edge of that spade. Congratulations, you're picturing Platybelodon. It was part of a group called the Gomphotheres, distant relatives of modern elephants. And while most of its cousins took the standard tusk and trunk approach, Platybelodon went full DIY hardware store. Its name literally means flat spear tusk, which sounds less like an animal and more like a medieval farming implement. And that's pretty much what it was. This elephant didn't just graze on grass, it attacked vegetation. Paleontologists believe it used its flattened lower jaw like a scythe, swinging it into soft aquatic plants or stripping bark from trees by grinding the shovel mouth up and down. The front edge of the jaw had two wide, flat tusks. Think of them as serrated shovels, while the upper tusks were either tiny or totally absent, depending on the specimen. For a long time, reconstructions made it look absolutely ridiculous. A short-trunked, shovel-mouthed elephant awkwardly scooping mud. It became meme-worthy among paleo fans, partly because it looked like it should star in a prehistoric Pixar short, and partly because we just weren't sure what it did. But wear patterns on the fossilized teeth finally gave us clues. Those gnarly jaw tusks, they weren't for digging, they were for slicing. This elephant mowed down vegetation like a living hedge trimmer. Size-wise, Platybelodon wasn't small. It reached about 3 to 4 meters tall at the shoulder, roughly the size of an African elephant today, and probably weighed between 4 to 6 tons. But where today's elephants exude wisdom and grace, Platybelodon just looked like it would bump into trees a lot. Functional? Yes. Elegant? Not remotely. It lived in warm, swampy environments across what is now Africa, Europe, and Asia, places with soft, marshy plants it could easily shred with its bizarro jaw. And while it probably had a trunk, it was shorter than modern elephants, more like an extended upper lip. That shovel mouth did all the heavy lifting. Why evolve into an herbivorous murder plow? Simple. It worked. For a while. Until it didn't. Like many strange megafauna, Platybelodon eventually disappeared, probably due to climate change and competition with more conventionally built elephants. Nature tried the shovel strategy, realized it wasn't scalable, and moved on. Still, Platybelodon deserves respect. It was the prehistoric equivalent of a multi-tool. Part lawnmower, part tree shredder, all weird. And if you ever thought elephants were just gentle giants, remember, one of them evolved to go full mulcher. If the Cambrian period had a theme, it would be, try everything and see what sticks. Evolution during this time, roughly 541 to 485 million years ago, was a lawless brainstorm session. The result? Creatures so bizarre that even today, some of them still can't be classified without causing arguments. And in the center ring of this freak show, Opabinia and Anomalocaris. Let's start with Opabinia. It's about as long as a pencil, harmless by today's standards, and deeply cursed. Imagine a creature with 5 eyes. Not compound eyes, not eyes in pairs, 5 individual eyes sticking out from its head on little stalks like googly antennae. Now give it a backwards-facing mouth under its head, and a long, flexible proboscis ending in a grasping claw. Just to make sure you never sleep again. Discovered in the Burgess Shale of British Columbia, Opabinia was so weird that when its discoverer, Harry Whittington, presented it at a conference in 1972, the audience laughed. Not because it was a joke, but because it looked like one. It was clearly a swimmer with lateral lobes down its sides and a fan-shaped tail, probably scooting along the Cambrian seafloor while it hunted small prey. But its face? That was clearly designed by committee, and none of the members were sober. Then there's Anomalocaris, which was actually 3 different fossils misidentified as separate animals for years. One was a ring of mouth parts, mistaken for a jellyfish. Another was a pair of grasping appendages, thought to be shrimp. And the third? Its body, mistaken for a sponge. Only later did scientists realize they were all parts of the same animal, a giant compared to everything else at the time. Anomalocaris means abnormal shrimp, which is both accurate and extremely underselling it. This thing could grow up to a meter long, the apex predator of the Cambrian seas. It had large compound eyes, a pair of front arms used to grab prey, and a circular mouth full of interlocking plates that could crush, or at least grip and shred, soft-bodied organisms. Not ideal if you were a trilobite with nowhere to hide. What made Anomalocaris really special was its swimming. Unlike most bottom-crawling weirdos of the Cambrian, it used undulating lobes down the sides of its body to propel itself forward, kind of like a prehistoric manta ray with anger issues. It was agile, fast, and very likely the reason other animals started evolving harder shells, just to avoid being turned into sushi. These two aren't even the end of the Cambrian strangeness. This era also gave us creatures like Wiwaxia, covered in scales and spines, like a metal slug, Nectocaris, a possible early cephalopod with a flexible funnel, and Dinomycius, a flower-shaped filter feeder glued to the seafloor for reasons known only to itself. It was a time before things settled into categories. There were no clear vertebrates, no fish, no insects, just experimental blueprints. Evolution hadn't finalized the designs yet, and it was tossing out prototypes like a caffeine-fueled engineer with access to a 3D printer and no deadlines. And thank whatever natural forces were responsible for that, because the Cambrian explosion gave us a fossil record that's more entertaining than anything on Netflix. These weren't just ancient animals. They were living hallucinations, and thankfully they fossilized well enough to haunt us forever. That wraps up our prehistoric gallery of evolutionary misfires, misunderstood monsters, and deeply unsettling design choices. From upside down worms and jaw spiral sharks to duck faced frankengeese and Illinois state sponsored fever dream, these creatures prove one thing: evolution had a wild imagination and absolutely no chill.